Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. You are most welcome wherever you are. I hope you are having a nice day. And I do these podcasts with authors, especially authors who do not have a lot of ecosystem behind them to promote any kind of thing, whatever they publish. And that's the problem everybody faces. And especially if you write books which break old age set norms and the set beliefs and the books which basically are disruptive in nature. So here is Dr. M.R. Venkatesh with me, a wonderful orator. You have seen him on television many, many times. Now it's an opportunity to read his mind. He has come out with his new book. It's called Retaining Balance. And retaining balance, I think, is the most important thing of a human life. Retaining balance is something which nobody teaches in schools and colleges. And after we have graduated, post graduated, done a lot of work, and when we really face the challenges of life, then everybody starts talking about how important it is to maintain balance. Even the professors who teach you, they also start talking about it. So retaining balance suggests, Emma, that there is initially, I mean, organically, there is balance. We have to just retain it,
Yes.
which means somebody is disrupting this balance. Somebody is breaking this balance and making life lopsided or skewed, as they say in economics, or prejudiced or biased or whatever. And so, what is it that, how did you think? I know you were flying and in an aircraft and you were reading a book, and from the first chapter, this thought came to your mind. But besides that, see, it must have been happening in your mind, this question answer. That's why the book triggered it off. And
Yes. Yes.
what is this debate which was going in your mind?
Okay.
What was this conflict which was going in your mind, which ultimately culminated into writing a book called Retaining Balance?
Brilliant observation, Vivekji, because it is not regaining balance; it is retaining balance, or gaining balance. It is about retaining. Meaning there was something originally there. It is growing out of your grasp, but still within you, and you have to retain it. So that means that things are in shape. Also, things are also slipping out of your. You are in an inflection point. So you can either degenerate further, or you have to go back and you can retain your balance. So I think you have hit the nail right on the head by posing a very interesting observation. The question is, what at what point of time, I ask myself, did we, the Homo sapiens, become man? There's a
Okay.
fundamental question. At what point of time? Do you say that this was on such and such a day, on Pongal or Diwali or Christmas or whatever? Did you decide that you became a man? My answer to that was when we understood that there was something called culture. There's something that needs to be practiced. And what was the first cultural inflection point that mankind faced, or created, was the institution of marriage. The institution of marriage was so important in the development of mankind. Unfortunately, we say talk about fire, we talk about nuclear energy, we talk about so many things else, but we do not talk about this particular development in the history of mankind. That is development of the institution of marriage. We talk about parliament, we talk about democracy, we talk about so many things, but this is least talked about because this brought about a fundamental tectonic shift in the behavior of the animal into man. what
Hmm.
is what is that is predominant in an animal characteristic? It is dominated by alpha males. Take a lion, take a tiger, it has a harem, it goes about and does all that it needs to do to procreate. Man was also doing this as Homo sapiens. But somewhere down the line, we said, no, we will stop. And our forefathers realized this was not the best way to go forward. And we decided that one man for a lady and a lady for a man is the best way to go forward. That brought down sexual competition within the society, that gave an equal chance to every male to have a lady partner, that brought down unnecessary competition, and with less of competition there was more peace, and more peace resulted in progress. This is the hypothesis on which I have built. Now this institution of marriage has been under constant attack right from the days of Plato till Marx, till even to the modern day liberalism. And what they are trying to do, Vivekji, is to replace the alpha male with an alpha female. And you want, in fact, if you have coined this term which is so popular, the urban nexus, I want to popularize this term called alpha female, which seems to be an answer of the feminine gender to the excesses of the male gender. You have to curb the excesses of the male gender. You have to put a curb on him. That is what civilization is all about. You can't say you have taken 3 pegs of scotch, I will take 3 pegs of single malt, and so your
Yeah.
3 pegs matches my 3 pegs, and so we are all in a liberalized world. That is not the way to do it. So I think there is something fundamentally flawed in our approach. So that's why we said we have to retain this balance between man and women to begin with. Of course, I have talked about several imbalances that has crept in, arising because we have not cognized this particular balance, and we have to set our house in order. That's how this whole book is.
So tell me,
But
what according to you is the biggest imbalance in Indian society per se? We'll go global later on. I want to understand what is, pick one thing. What is that single most important imbalance in Indian society which is causing all the regression, slow growth, conflict, chaos in India? What is it according to you?
the relationship between the state and the citizens. What
Okay.
should be the state?
So
राज्य
first
क्या
let's
होनी चाहिए?
identify. So first tell me what should be the relationship between state and citizens.
Okay. I would, you have to, that's the answer to that would be to define what should be the state.
Okay.
Should it be an omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient state? That as a prime minister is compelled to tell you to do Swachh Bharat, a prime minister is compelled to come and tell you to wear your mask repeatedly. Is this or a welfare that happens in America, that a 16-year-old can get pregnant right royally, and she did not have to worry because the state will step in and see to that her child
Yeah.
will be taken to the crèche in the school in which she is studying. Is this the state duty of the state? I'm not only talking about India, I'm talking globally, where we are moving to a nanny state, where the state, without having the genetic endowment of your nanny, begins to sing lullaby to you through a joint secretary. Is this what we have to define ourselves as the ideal state, or is it that we have created a Kamchalau state after 1947? Of course, we were fatigued thanks to 1,000 years of war and invasion. We at last got our independence. We said, ठीक है, एक constitution बना लेते हैं जो काम चलाऊ है, उसको हमने बना लिया. That 75 years has gone by. Don't you think we have to revisit it and say, good Lord, is this the constitution that is redefining or defining precisely the relationship between the state and the citizen as it is known to the civilization of Bharatiya people? Should it be a duty-based constitution? Or is it that we have to talk about fundamental rights? You know, Vivekji, you are a big traveler. You jet set across India. You go across various people. Take this as a simple test. Go to an auto driver, tea chai bechne wala, a small restaurant. You ask them, what is your duty? They will answer it. They know what is their duty. But we have imposed a right-based constitution on a duty-based civilization. You know, there is a beautiful movie called Onion in Tamil. I don't know whether you have seen it. The hero suffers. The hero suffers from multiple personality disorder. So he assumes he is multiple characters in his own mind and acts differently. We are Bharatiyas when we deal with Vivek Agnihotri. But Vivek Agnihotri, joint secretary, मेरे सामने आ जाएंगे. I become Indian. I talk about my rights. And Vivek Agnihotri will also talk about what the law says and what it is there, what it is not there, what is the rule says. So we become a dual. We are the only country where we have named our country in two different ways. Japan is
Hmm.
Japan in Japanese. Japan is Japan for everybody. China is China for Chinese. It is different for. It is no different for anybody. But we are saying in first article of our constitution, India, that is Bharat.
Yeah.
So हम भारतीय भी हैं और इंडियन भी हैं.
Hmm.
And in all our non-formal relationship, we are Bharatiyas. And with formal institutions like the government, like the judiciary, like when we go for any formal contract where we have to involve the state, we become Indians.
Hmm.
So we are having this problem. So this debate that I'm trying to kindle is whether this constitution, which gives a constitution which is predominantly Christian in character, to a Hindu civilization workable for eternity.
Hmm.
This is the question. That was another trigger for this book.
And it's a great question, it must be raised. So I always had a problem. Okay, these days in public, if you say people come to kill you, it's blasphemy to say anything against the constitution. Constitution
Yes.
is supposed to be a charter for citizens, which citizens should be allowed to discuss, debate, criticize in whichever manner they want. But today, because your book also, you have spoken a lot about how we are influenced by Christian theology, the economy and everything, and which is true. We have converted constitution also into a kind of a religious book, and saying anything against Ambedkar or the constitution is blasphemy. My biggest problem is there was no confusion whether we are India or Bharat. We were Bharat. It's mentioned everywhere from Mahabharat till date. Everybody knows it's a Bharat. I travel all across India, everybody calls it Bharat. When people speak in their native language, they call it Bharat. Nobody calls it India. But the minute we
Yes.
come into public platform, it the whole the MR the whole thing about posturing begins, and then we
Yes.
start saying India. You know, and why have we done that? Why, with foreigners, we call it India, and when we are in India, we call it Bharat? And this confusion actually is not a fake confusion.
It's a very genuine
It's the real
confusion.
problem of India. There is a
Exactly.
certain community which is not very big in numbers. They, by their mindset, they do not understand Bharat. And then there is huge majority of people in India. They don't think they are Indians. They think they are Bharatiya. The minute you say Bharatiya, it means the cultural thread which has been running for thousands of years and the civilizational thing, and you immediately connect with that. देखिए जो भी anybody who says I am a Bharati, the first thought comes family, relationship, society, community, everything, our culture. The minute you say India, you feel you are a global citizen and totally cut off from everything else.
You are in
Now,
Lutyens, Delhi.
problem, this is a very big problem with this country, and this is the reason why most of the problems don't get solved, because
Yes.
the control is with people who want it to become India. Why idea of India when we have millions of ideas of Bharat? भाई
Yes.
इतने
Uh,
शास्त्र, इतनी किताबें, इतना लिटरेचर लिखा गया है. चलिए, forget everybody else. Okay, let's forget Nehru for the time being. Let's come to the typical India lobby logic, and this is a very important one. Even if you read Gandhi and Gandhi's vision about India, it's all based on Bharatiya thinking.
yes.
It has nothing to do with international thinking.
Yeah.
Then why the same Congress and the same people abandoned that and they adopted this Western model? This is beyond young generation's comprehension. But economy now, so you are saying that our economy also does not consider the family traditions and the family values. What are you trying to
Yes.
say there? What has economy got to do with family?
Okay. It is something like this. World over, economists are now grappling with the theory that they have tried socialism or Marxism or commanding heights of the economy to be handled by the state, which is basically the Keynesian model or the Marxian model. So Keynesian model was a variant of Marxian model, and Marxian model a variation of the Keynesian model. Then came people like Hayek, who championed absolute liberalism with people like Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and others. They went about their whole ideas in gung ho manner. By 2008, when the great economic crisis came about in America, remember it was a
Yeah.
financial crisis in America. It turned out into be an economic crisis of the world. What is
I
America's
was in America
financial?
that time. I was in
Yes.
America that time, so I know it.
So financial crisis of America has become the global economic crisis. So you must understand what is the nexus. That nexus is what has been challenged by economists now. And they are now finding out we are again going back to the Keynesian model. And in 2008, we have all become Keynesian all over once again. So it is like a pendulum that swings from one idea to the other and one idea back to the other without a third fresh alternative being developed. The reason for it is by 1930s, original idea of say Adam Smith and others, which you look into it, he was talking about Weaver, Baker, and the Beaver, Baker, and others. He was talking about in his village commune, which were basically people who were doing their job. Now, what has happened is that we have complexed the economics so much that we want it to be so rational, so perfect. We substituted through mathematical modeling and econometrics modeling using calculus and various type of tools just to show our punditry. We have diverged economics from culture to such an extent that culture which dominates economics has become completely uncorrelated and a distant cousin of economics. We completely diverged economics from culture. Now, there is a Professor Zingales who I have quoted in my book, and Zingales says very pertinently that look, culture is very important, and unfortunately, culture cannot be reduced to mathematical formula through dy by dx. And so he says mathematics has dominated economics, quantitative techniques have dominated economics, and since it has come to dominate economics, it has diversed culture. It is like a new wife coming and dominating the household and getting rid of the old wife. So that's how we have diversed. Originally, mathematics was never a part of economics. It was always culture and economics that went hand in hand. Today, we have to, that's again your answer to your first question. We have to regain our balance or retain our balance because it is the fact that original thought was to have economics and culture to be seen as this two sides of the same coin.
Okay, so now let me move a little further. So great. I think you have explained it so beautifully. I'm just it's opening up lots of ideas in my mind. Okay, Amar, I think everybody is complaining about you listening to me.
Yes, I am. I am.
Okay.
I am.
So what I'm saying is that everywhere in the world, everybody is talking about a major conflict going on between the society. In US, there is a major conflict going on, unprecedented. I've lived in US, studied there. I've been to US hundreds of times. In Europe, in every single country, there is a conflict between various societies and communities. In every country you go, there are people are feeling that their culture is being threatened and
Yes.
what they were original, their identity original is changing, and they feel it is being threatened by some unknown forces, and generally the blame goes to either America or China and all those kind of things. Now my theory is this: why this is happening is because of globalization. Now globalization today is being, I'm not getting to the merits and demerits of globalization, why it happened, but globalization, the biggest problem is globalization is not a cultural policy. Globalization is a economic tool basically, so that you can sell your products to all the markets. Okay, now the problem is when you say market, then there is a consumer also, and consumer behaves in a certain way. Now Indian consumer behaves, reacts to ganne ka ras, a sugarcane juice, or to a rasam very differently than an American would react to these things. But our reaction to a cold drink or a soup is very different, than rasam. So consumers behave differently. They have psychographics, demographics, social behavior, 1 million things come into play. Now, globalization wants to sell Coca-Cola all over the world. They want to sell McDonald's all over the world, their Ford Motors and everything. So therefore, they want a uniform consumer behavior. They
Homogenization.
want consumers in every society to behave in the same manner, which means the ad of Coca-Cola or McDonald's, or whenever you see that sign M, the response triggered by that message should be uniform all over the world. Then only purchase can be made. And which is why billions and trillions of dollars and muscle has been spent in making the consumer behavior uniform. And which I'm a marketing student, so the which means dumbing down people. So what we have done is we have dumbed down the institution of politics, we have dumbed down the institution of media, we have dumbed down everything to such a level where there is no scope for nuances or understanding of culture, and which is why all over the world you see everywhere universally people are feeling their culture is being destroyed by external forces. In Japan, same thing is happening. In Saudi Arabia, same thing is happening. In Canada, the same thing is happening. In America, also, they are feeling, the people who actually designed this model of globalization, their own people are feeling that their culture is being threatened by outside forces. This is my theory about it. Now, in this scenario, which is a real scenario, how does your theory of retaining balance help? How will you correct it? What is the solution forward?
Okay. Yeah, you have forgotten to add one gentleman called Putin, who also
Yeah,
believes that Russian culture is being threatened. Now, if the one of the strongest personalities of the modern political world feels threatened
yeah,
by something, you must not take it lightly. Now, globalization, I always ask my students one question, whether it has ZATION or SATION, and students don't know the answer. And it's the word itself is not globalized, and yet you want to globalize the world. So you must understand it's a very complex idea. And this Vivek ji, I would only have a small shall I say amplified thought to what you said, and I have written about it in my book also. Globalization is always a Western idea flowing from Christianity. This homogenization of the world is basically an Abrahamic thought. So this dumb down of through advertisements and repeated advertisement, that you diverse yourself from your own family and begin to identify, आप किस जात के हो, तो हम बोलेंगे कि हम एप्पल जात के हैं, और आप बोलेंगे हम सैमसंग जात के हैं. So
yeah.
people have to be completely derooted so that you can make them an unformatted hard disk, and then put this idea of products into their mind, and they feel so low on their esteem if they don't buy a product which is branded and it is has a particular value. So the complete man is for basically a man who is incomplete. You must understand the tagline of Raymond. The complete man is one who is incomplete, basically. First you make him incomplete, then you give your fabric, and then you say that he is now complete. So the larger point that you are talking about is about globalization, which is very interesting. This wave of globalization comes in with it's a three-headed monster. There is a theological drive, there is a army drive, and there is a commercial drive. In the first 10 centuries post Christ, it was predominantly driven by theology, with army and commerce doing a secondary role. The second 1,000 years, army joined with theology, with commerce also playing, but not a distant role, but a secondary role. But beginning of the third millennia post Christ, we see a convergence of theological factors. We see army. We see also commerce. So you can be invaded by Christianity. You can be invaded by American army. You can be invaded by McDonald's. So all three can invade you in 21st century, and you can do nothing about it. And there is only one bulwark that will stand against all the three. It is the family. Family is the only institution that stands against all isms, and they have triumphed. And that is why chapter 3 is titled "To Destroy Family, Marx Goes to Market." So Marx and liberals have one wonderful convergence of idea. to destroy family, दोनों हाथ मिला लेंगे.
हाँ.
To
That's
destroy tradition, family, culture, women's respect, all these things, Marx will join hands with liberals. Otherwise, there is only one problem with them is about the ownership, whether it is to be collective ownership of an asset or whether it is to be individually owned. That's all is the difference. बाकी सब में Marxism, I don't see Marxism as antithesis of liberalism. I see Marxism and liberals as one and the same, like a hydra-headed monster having two different faces. That's all.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree with you. Ajay, I have a very interesting theory here. There is something which I have arrived at a certain conclusion. I was studying MR seriously. I did a lot of research and I realized that wherever the colonial powers went, be it Dutch or French or British or whoever, they were all Christians. And at that time, they were like fundamental Christians, fundamentalist Christians, radical. They wanted to spread it all over the world. So wherever they went in the world, and whichever country or society they colonized, all of them, without any exception, converted into a Christian society or a Christian country. Anywhere you see in the world, right from Australia to New Zealand to wherever you see, including America. So they became Christian countries. And wherever Islamic invaders went, right, those nations became Islamic. The old civilizations died and they became Islamic countries. Even if you look at Indonesia and Malaysia, these are all, वो तो हमारी आंखों के सामने हुआ है. But even if you look at the ancient history, that thing happened. But there is only one exception in this world. In the history of civilization of humankind, there is only one exception, which is Bharat. They Islamic, and we are the only country which was ruled for almost 1,000 years by minorities. No other country has been ruled by minorities. In Africa, when these colonizers went there, within 2 hours the king surrendered and the entire country said, okay, now from now on we are Christians, and they surrendered. So then it was ruled by Christians, converted Christians. We are the only society for 1,000 years we were ruled by first Islamic invaders, then the Christian invaders, and even last 70 years the missionaries. But when the Britishers left us, at that time we were majorly a Hindu country. Majority was still Hindu. 10%, 11%, even 20% were non-Hindus, but they were converted. But majority was Hindus. We retained ourselves as a Hindu society. And the reason why it happened was because of our family system. Because our family per se is the controlling unit, is the values which are inculcated in the generations come from the family. Unlike the Western, the Catholic and this thing where the values are coming from Quran or Bible or by the church. Church is forcing. In India, temples do not force values into this thing. It's the family, it's the mother who's giving values to people. But then immediately after independence, what we did was that again we became part of that global thinking, and that's where the whole emphasis on the family started declining. And the biggest problem
only
in
one
70
family.
years, let me just finish. Yeah, last thought. I think in last 70 years, and I hold every single government responsible for this, previous governments, today's government, and I think even future governments are responsible for this. We have not invested even 1 rupee in per capita cultural development. We have not done anything. We look at it from materialistic things, architecture. We have not created anything in 70 years where next generations are going to be proud of. Architecture is part of culture. The state has not done anything to teach culture or civilization in schools. What is life? What are values? How do you live together as a society? Now, family, we have very easily modern media and everything has started saying, oh, she's a housewife and therefore she's not empowered. No, the kind of sacrifice she makes, the housewife, the kind of values she gives to the next generation, the kind of social network she creates around her and becomes a community leader, that quality comes only from an empowered person. So in my mind, I think our biggest sin we have made is post-independence, not invested a penny on culture, which begins from family and the villages. That's why I give credit to Gandhi, because he spoke a lot about villages and the mothers. This is what I think. What are your views on this?
Yeah, to put it, I just wanted to say we invested only in one family post independence, and we thought we have done enough to family. so, so our idea of family was only one family. Be that as
Yeah.
it may, you are touching a very raw nerve on the programming part of it. The idea is, if you look even today into the Ministry of Culture's website, it thinks about maintaining Lal Killa and Fatehpur Sikri is the idea of culture, and convert some old temples which are now not in use or disuse, or which has been decimated by Islamic invaders. उसको थोड़ा बचा के उसमें एंट्री फी करके 20-25 रुपया टिकट लेके छोड़ देना है. We are not thinking about culture as something what we are. First thing is, culture is what we are. Civilization is what we were. The Ministry of Culture is should be rechristened as Ministry of Civilization.
Yeah.
And
That's a great
and
idea.
yeah, actually what we mean is we want to tell the world and preserve something what we were, and to which we have to say that we are Ministry of Civilization. And the civilization, that is why I've dedicated this book to Lord Sri Rama, is because once you talk about civilization and culture, we are talking about, goes back to my fundamental thing, that one man for a lady. See, biologically, nature gives you one baby boy for one baby girl. But how can you, Vivek ji, at the age of 25, when one boy is born for every baby girl, suddenly when you attain the age of marriage, you want to have 4 ladies for a boy. Where will the supply come from? And one boy taking 4 girls makes 3 boys ineligible to marry, because there is no ladies. And what do they become? They become jihadis. Yeah, you create an ultimate atmosphere by telling them that if you don't get ladies here, try to wage a war there. And when you wage a war there, you loot and plunder, get over the ladies into your system. Or if you die in the process, you get 72 up there. So this is a very important part of my research.
Okay.
That I have said how theological drive in Islam creates an army of jihadi warriors. You have never created a jihadi warrior out of women in Islam.
That's true.
So very
That's true. I didn't observe that. Yeah, that's a great observation.
see why, if Islam is followed by women and men, why is it that the women are not blowing it up? Because they don't have because they have been dominated by the alpha male.
Hmm.
Now coming to this particular issue of culture and family, that is why Lord Rama has so much to give to the outside world. Lord Rama is not a mythical or even a religious figure. In fact, we in South India believe Ramrajya was an ideal point, wherein in his entire reign of 10,000 years, we believe that Rama ruled for 10,000 years. And Rama's reign was not even punctuated once by one Akala Maran. That means one father did not carry the cortege of his son. There was no natural disaster, because everybody observed restraint. Everybody were cultured. And it was and actually Rama did not do anything. Rama did actually, if you see, that is why my 10th chapter is Ram Rajya is Rajya without Rama.
Hmm.
Ram Rajya, which is what Gandhiji promises in Hind Swaraj and talks about it right through up to 1947 and 48 when he's assassinated, promises Ram Rajya. Ram Rajya is where the state is a residuary state. It is not an omnipotent, omnipresent, सबके लिए ये योजना बनाते जाएंगे. Finally, we end up as bhojanas for the bureaucracy. All yojanas are bhojanas for somebody, not that it has led to any development.
Hmm.
So we have to reorient ourselves to ask a fundamental question: राज्य क्या होनी चाहिए? गवर्नमेंट क्या करना चाहिए? प्रशासन को क्या करना चाहिए? If you answer that question, you can then say citizens have to do the rest. In my state, there is a competitive politics amongst the two DMK the Dravidian parties, as they call it. They are in competitive welfareism. That's all. The whole idea of manifesto writing for DMK and ADMK is, what is the type of freebie I can give it to the voters? Whether it will be fridge, whether it will be grinder, whether it will be TV, whether it will be cycle, whether it will be laptop. This is the discussion. Is this the job of the state? And at this level, after so much of so-called progress that we have done since independence, finally, where are we landing ourselves? We are landing up to a state where we have to feed people out of free grains, free anaj, free this, free that. That means we are taxing the disciplined and the honest and the sincere, hardworking person. So we are transferring wealth from the hands of the disciplined through the most inefficient mechanism called bureaucracy into the hands of people who may deserve this, who may not deserve this. Their deserving is indeterminate for us. So we have to go back, step back and answer the second question. How should we convert ourselves from a right-based constitution to a duty-based constitution?
That's a great idea. And that's where I think the fundamental problem of this country is the system. Our system is so weak and it is so ineffective that what we think by changing the government, things will change. It will never happen. I'll just
the system.
Let me just give you an example. You know, I was studying in USA. From Harvard, I came out and then I joined advertising over there. But at the same time, Rajiv Gandhi was making lots of promises that, okay, I will create a new India. And in that temptation, I said, and he said, all the young people should come back to India and we should make it like a superpower. And I came here, I gave up my green card, came here thinking that, okay, I will contribute to changing India. Okay, that never happened. Then VP Singh said, I will create a new India. That new India never happened. Okay, then Narasimha Rao promised. Of course, Narasimha Rao created a kind of a new India, but then system, I mean, the justice never came to people. Poor remain poor. We are as chaotic as, okay, we have got more malls and brands and all that. In a way, okay, we become prosperous, but that prosperity has no meaning because culturally we kept degenerating, you know. So as a civilization, as a culture, as a society, we started degenerating. Corruption became more, you know, people became very materialistic. Whole lot of things happened. After that, then Sonia Gandhi, Manmohan Singh, they promised, Bajpayee Sahab promised that I'll create a new India. In my mind, new India is not just few flyovers and highways. In my mind, new India is full of young people, the generation which feels happy and good about living in this country. Why is it, MR, that I have read a lot of old texts and literature, and up to Mughals came to India, we were contributing, when Mughals came, we were contributing almost 1/4 of the global economy. You would know it better than me. We were innovators. We were innovating in literature, philosophy, music, science, in a whole lot of areas, agriculture, community living, family system, a whole lot of things, you know, we were innovating. And which is why people came to invade, because we were a knowledge center. India, in Greek texts, they have written that India is the cradle of civilization. Then in another book I've read, it says that India is the knowledge center of the world. This is not in India, it's Greek literature, it's written over there. So that's why people invaded, because whoever controls knowledge center controls the world. Whoever controls 1/4 global economy controls the world. People came. Which means our society was not so degenerated and so chaotic as it is today. Now, in last 7 years also, we have a new government. Yes, fine. I am also a very big supporter of Mr. Narendra Modi. Okay, I totally know where he wants to take us, what is happening. But at the same time, if you look at it, our system has not improved at all. So Mr. Modi can also just change few policies here and there. Article 370 you have abolished. But what happened for 2-3 years? It's still stuck. Problem. because the system is not supporting it. Today, people are sitting for 1 year at farmer protest, but the system has no solution to it. System is making people suffer. System is making people feeling pessimistic. You ask any young Indian, "Ki, what is it that you would like to do at this moment?" I guarantee almost 99 out of 100 young boys and girls will tell you that we want to leave India and go abroad. So we have created this kind of a paradigm where people believe that abroad means happiness, prosperity, which is also wrong. That we have no hope. And this hope is artificially created, which means there's a fundamental problem in our economy, there's a fundamental problem in our judiciary, there's a fundamental problem in our civic institutions, there's a fundamental problem with our politics. This is something which bothers me. And this is the biggest threat to India. Without changing the system, India cannot change. Only governments will change, but they will also succumb to the same system. You are an advocate. You know judiciary has not changed despite the change in governments. What are your views on this?
You have come to probably the climax of my book, and probably you have said what I wanted to say in 2 lakh words. Probably you said in 200, and uh, being a filmmaker, you probably did it in one shot. Okay. Now, yeah, I would readily concede that this is the core idea of my book. That systems that we try to borrow, steal, get inspired from outside of the world, it's all good. But you are also a civilization that has been a function civilization for 5,000, 8,000 years. Kuch to achhi hogi, as you pointed out, that wherever Christians overran the country became a Christian country. Wherever the Islamic invaders overran that country transformed itself into an Islamic country. We have been predominantly Hindu country, despite, as you said, being ruled by the minorities for 1,000 years and invaders. And it was at tremendous. So something must have been done by our people, right, to sustain this as a civilization for 1,000 years. This is something that is bothering me, and I know I asked myself this question: how could somebody have devised a system that runs on itself despite invasions, despite a hostile atmosphere for 1,000 years? But when Pandit Nehru's turn came to debate on the Constituent Assembly, he says, look at France, look at Italy, look at Ireland. And he says, let us get inspired and draw a constitution as they have drawn. And this, I would say that we want to deracinate ourselves, degrade ourselves by not looking inwards. And time has probably come. Vivekji, probably it is no longer within the remit of the political class, because it perpetuates the same type of system on them, and so that they can do this another 5 years of experiment with us. But I think we owe it to the next generation not to blame it on the bureaucracy, judiciary, or the political class. Probably it is time for Vivek Agnihotri to probably write or bring about a book or a movie about how do we change the system. How is it that we need to change the system? People agree, yes, everybody says, yes, we have to change the system. We need to say, what are the judicial reforms? What are the administrative reforms? What are the reforms that we can think about in, say, the constitutional mechanism? I, for one, have proposed in my book, duties must be made part of fundamental rights. Fundamental rights without duties. Mahatma Gandhi writes a letter to Julian Huxley in 1947 or 46. He says, my illiterate but wise mother would not appreciate of rights without duties. I'm sure your grandmother, my grandmother, our respective mothers would not accept of pure rights. There is nothing called rights. But that this rights is basically a Hobbesian thought flowing from Leviathan. And we have taken that as our model. The model is not Rousseau, the model is not Thomas Hobbes, the model is not Madison, the model is not even Christianity, Catholic thoughts, or Calvinist spirits. The idea must be Chanakya. I'm not saying Chanakya is eternal. Let us borrow from him also. I'm not saying don't borrow from Thomas Hobbes or Rousseau. We will take that also. But our constitution was done in great haste by a set of people who were tired. Some of them had suffered imprisonment. Some of them had made great sacrifices for the independence. They did a great job in the context of 1947 to 1949. But the truth of the matter is that the Constitution of India is by and large a rehashed version of the 1935 Government of India Act created by the British to rule India. So that is why it's called transfer of power. We need to actually transfer of power from British to India तो हो गया है. From Indians to Bharatiya होने को बाकी है. We have to transfer the power from this is the system that you are talking about.
Yeah.
That we need to talk about Indians to Bharatiya, the gravitational change, the tectonic change that has to happen. And that requires a 20-25 year program. Probably we may be lucky to succeed in the 10th year, I don't know. But somewhere down the line, we have to draw a blueprint and say our government systems. And you are very candid, Vivekji, that you and I are probably very frank in admitting the systems are not working. The fact of the matter is it's not a change in pilot that will make the aircraft fly. It's the change of the aircraft that is the need of the hour.
Yeah, I mean, even the best pilot, if the aircraft is faulty, the pilot will also keep struggling with it, Then what happens?
So
because we have become a problem-focused country.
Yeah.
India, Bharat, was always, see, I am a great student of Hindu philosophy. I am not so much the religious side. I focused on the philosophical side because religion says this is the answer, believe in it. Whereas philosophy raises more questions, and that gives you a chance to probe the society and evolution. And I'm extremely proud. I mean, my people who know me, they claim that there cannot be a more proud person than me of our philosophy. I think we have produced the greatest of the philosophers. But when you read the great philosophers of the world, if you go to internet or anywhere, nobody, even their names are not mentioned. In my mind, Chanakya was a great philosopher, but his name is not mentioned. Nobody's name is mentioned. In India also, people don't consider
Adi Shankara, one of the greatest philosophers.
Abhinav Gupta, Adi Shankara, you name it, whoever, Patanjali, these are great philosophers. They brought great philosophy. But the problem is, in India also, nobody knows they were philosophers because nobody teaches them, nobody tells them about it. So, what I think is, one example I want to give you the greatness of our system. What is the greatness of our system? And this is something which I learned recently. Why Mahabharata was a Shruti? Why these were not written documents? The reason is because it was believed that Shruti and Smriti, everybody knows, believe that as you start telling these stories to the world is always evolving and changing, so that the coming generations have a scope to correct and add things according to the changing society. Look at this vision, amazing vision. But our constitution stuck for last 70 years in the same place. In the same place. We live in a digital world, in a globalized world. There are so many threats all around us, but our understanding of running the state remains the same. So as you said, climates, I think very well explained, MR. I am really enriched, and it gives me an idea that one day we should have a long discussion on what should be the vision for a Bharat, new Bharat, or the future of Bharat. We should make, you and me, you should make 5 points, I should make 5 points, and discuss around that. How do you like that?
Sure. I will definitely be happy and honored, Vivekji, to discuss with you. You are one of the most cerebral filmmakers that I have come across. And always it has been a pleasure chairing panels with you. That I always, and at least I have watched Buddha in a Traffic Jam 3 times. Believe me, I don't watch movies. But I saw that movie for only one simple reason. There were so many messages in that movie that and thanks to you, Urban Nexus has become part of the political lexicon.
Thank you. I will invite you to see the Kashmir Files. I think it's one of the most important films of Indian civilization. Though Kashmir
Oh,
sounds as if it's only about the conflict, but this one film will tell the younger generations why they should be proud of this great civilization. That's what the film is all about, that how our great civilization is being threatened by these conflicts and chaos which have been manufactured, all the times. Anyway, so great talking to you, Amar. I wish you all the best with your book, and people who are watching it, you must buy this book. It's a very, very important book. So all the best, and we'll jam up again.
thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Amar. Okay, friends, so that was a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant author, advocate, and a great TV panelist and orator, Mr. M.R. Venkatesh, Dr. M.R. Venkatesh, and I would like you to buy his book. And as you know, that I had a very successful channel, I Am Buddha, but then I changed that. I got out of the temptation of numbers and I started this new channel because I want to talk with lots of authors and bring ideas. Today, everybody wants numbers, on YouTube, everywhere they are, it's the number game. But my philosophy is better to have the engaged audience, people who are interested in your subject should come and do this. I'll keep doing this service. This is my public service. I talk to authors and bring new knowledge to you, and I'll keep doing that. If you want, you can also help I Am Buddha research team by making a financial contribution, going to I Am Buddha site, or you can also share this link and our site of VRA TV with people. So thanks for joining me. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Have a great day.